So are we saying, is there gonna be a forum starting at?
For the whole thing, yeah, we need
Okay,
to.
I'm just gonna call the order and then I'm stepping out of time for a legal call,
Mhm.
but the meeting can just continue.
Yeah, and I think that we need to, if we want to adjust the agenda to reflect the rest of the day, because right now it just says
It's
the,
8 and what, I forget what
Um,
it's
the
for.
Carissa's office, yeah.
Hi, Rich, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can't hear the stuff you sent out yesterday.
You can't hear me. Can you hear me now?
Correct, yeah.
By the way, we're
Rich is-
recording, sorry, let me pause. And
Listen, I had a question too about do I have to do the thing about the new email? Do we have to do anything with that or does that just
I'm gonna-
happen?
We covered that.
I'm gonna do an updated board meeting tonight, don't worry about it now.
All right,
It'll be a matter of course.
okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to, our meeting on September 13th, 2022. It is 9:00 something a.m., 9:04 a.m. And this is a, special meeting, of the town board. We are going to be talking about, our ambulance and fire budget for 2022, as well as A fund and the budget for the clerk's office over the course of the next couple of hours. And what's the measure now? Attendance or evolving.
Ms. Olson,
Present.
excuse me, Mr. Box,
Present.
Ms. Marino, present. Mr. Goldman
Present.
is here via Zoom. Thank you.
And we wanted to add the discussion of the A fund of the clerk's office to the draft agenda that you were provided. And so with those changes, are there any additional changes to the agenda today? There are motions to approve. Second, all those in favor? Aye. Okay, is there anyone in the public who wishes to address? I see there's no one present. There's no one online, so we're going to move on past that. New business. So, moving on to the discussion of the SM and SF funds, which are the EMS and fire protection funds in the 2023 tentative draft budget.
And before we start, I wanna pass out something that I'm hoping we can leave at the town hall unless you want to study it at home. But these are the historic line by lines that you'll have to get to the SMSF fund, you'll have to go through a couple pages, but those were developed directly out of Williamson Law Book. We can only go back 2015 based on the size of the page and the readability, so sorry if you need to use a magnifying glass, but that was the best I could do. So you are welcome to take those, but if you're not going to use them at home, if you could leave them here for the budget meetings for the next couple weeks, that would be very helpful. Caitlin, are you okay with sort of teeing us off here with this based on the fact that you were the one at the meeting?
Yeah, so, so if you want to be the funds that we're talking about in the packet, so we'll have that on the very last page. Of the link document. Page 10. So we're in the position, the town finds itself on a routine basis that we have limited options for service for fire and EMS. And we are, because we contract for services, I'm preaching to the choir, of course, but I also just illuminating the public on this, is that we have limited options. So, and because the contract for services are basically presented with, the amount it's going to cost us, in any given year. Fire protection, their overall budget, actually went down, for, fire department. Last year, there is an increase for Ulysses because this is the first of the 5-year transition that we're gonna be making towards, a more, a largely assessment-based model. Prior to this point, for every year prior to this point, we have, the village has set it up so that we, Ulysses and the other members of the fire protection district, Mr. Covert and Hector, Card Hector, are, it's on a 3-year average call. And over time, that's had, in particular, the smaller, not as much for Ulysses, but for definitely Covert, in some degree Hector, has been that three-year average can change drastically from year to year of how many fire calls there are. And one of the things the village has been moving towards, and we've been talking about now for, I think this is a third round of meetings I've heard since I started on the board originally in 2020, was that moving towards a predominantly assessment-based model, and the current that will occur over a 5-year transition period. So a 20% increase each of those 5 years to get to the full assessment-based model. So under the assessment-based model, it changes on a year-to-year basis, but on average, it's going to be about 75% assessment-based, 25% all based on a 3-year call average. What it means for Ulysses is that at the end of the 5 years, when we're at total, provided that the fire protection district hasn't changed, which I think is highly likely, actually, the fire protection district will change within the next 5 years. It's expected to expand. To serve at least one more additional municipality, possibly two, possibly three. Is that if it remains what it is, Ulysses will be responsible for approximately 58% of the fire. And just to kind of put things in perspective about, I did research 2 years ago. Mike and I worked kind of on an ad hoc committee basis. We have some very limited choices in the town for fire protection. We can continue with the direction we are with the fire department that we have. And we actually, a lot of the volunteers for the fire department live in the town of Philippi, outside the village. And so we can continue there. We could set up a new fire protection district that was serviced by a different fire company. Our basically our only choice to go with Ithaca. At the time I spoke to Ithaca in 2022, it was going to be the rate was 2.5 per thousand for fire protection in 2022. They wanted to contract at the same point, it was 0.56 for the village fire. So there was no movement on board at that point to make a transition. And then our third option is essentially we could set up our own fire company, but the village, because the town, because of the state law, the town can actually run a fire company. We would basically set them up and they would get set their own budgets. They would get right. We looked into all that. It's not like it would be the town's fire company the way it's the village's fire company. We don't have the purview under state law to do that. So, and my position is we have a fire company. I personally am supportive of the fire company locally. We have a lot of constituents who serve the fire company. Their budget was to my mind effectively flat. I actually think I personally don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to for more of an assessment-based model. That's more of a progressive taxation model. That you have more land value or you have more property value, you pay more. You have less value, you pay less. It will help flatten for other municipalities, flatten their budget on a year-to-year basis in a way that doesn't impact it. It's not decisively impact it. We just don't see that.
So you said 75% assessment and 25% call average. Is that part of the transition or is that a permanent solution?
So that's going to be, well, so it's not fixed on a year-to-year basis what the percentage is. So basically what the village has been doing, and they calculated the cost on an annual basis. They're now calculating the cost it takes to run the fire company, even if they can going out on no cost. So how much of the cost to pay the insurance and the things that you have to pay for regardless of any service being provided. And that's constituting, and then they're counting how much are we spending actually in the provision of services. For originally, when they presented this 2 years ago, they got the breakdown in the 85% assessment, 15% call. For the 2023 budget of their 2020, I guess their 2020, yeah. For what we do pay in 2023, it's going to be 75%. It breaks down to 75% assessment, 25% 3-year call average. That percentage is probably most likely to vacillate on a year-to-year basis, but they found that it seems to be heading more in the 75% direction than that 85%. Does that make sense? So, the fire company, I mean, we'll get into the EMS, but the fire company is different because they are able to fundraise. And so they got the shots of life, was like, $100,000 piece of equipment that we're not paying for through our taxation, because the money was raised locally and privately. And so there is some huge talk about getting the fire code, they're looking at potential fundraising that way. As well, as opposed to, but it's, right now, you have to replace the dock and all of that. They don't have that. So.
Can I ask a question about, you were saying basically without any calls, the cost of having a fire department without services. That's tied to this discussion about TAV proportional to history. Okay. So basically they're paying the 75% for this year is based on TAV, and that's the part of the fire department budget that is just,
Base cost.
yeah, okay,
If nobody ever leaves the fire hall, there's something that.
Right. Okay.
So, and then the balance is on the 25%.
Yeah.
What's called. The other thing is, everybody, this is probably because I didn't before, but I knew about the fire protection, we have to have a fire. We do not have a fire. But I do, but I think the public is, so many people who are going to listen to this. So I didn't have a question.
Well, the fixed cost is that the personnel, or is the personnel tied to the number of calls?
So because the volunteer fire company, the personnel costs are really low in terms of this particular one, but we're talking about fixed costs associated with insurance. There's thinking on the equipment that has to be paid for.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
there's not very much
Very
personnel
low
as
personnel.
opposed to the.
Right, yeah,
And so-
fire.
Right,
volunteers.
so then one other question I have is there any accounting, anything taken into account in the accounting of the fact, I mean, so it's just being split, these fixed costs, but the village owns all of this stuff, and so they have all that as capital. As a capital resource that they are gaining, and everybody else is paying for split equally. Is there ever any discussion of that? Because that was bothering me since I heard about this, doing this was the way that they do it in general. I mean, they own it all, but there's nothing in their portion of it that, I mean, I'm not saying I'm not supportive of volunteer fire department, I totally am, but I just wondered about that because we're gonna need more and more equipment if they're expanding, and it's all their equipment. And
I'm sorry, and I misspoke, I should say, the fire, that is my.
and
apologize.
we're gonna have to pay more because we have a higher assessment than any of the other places they're likely going out to. And they're gonna need more equipment because they're going farther out. I'm worried about. the
So I'm
size
so
of
sorry,
this.
I misspoke. So they're not planning to expand the fire protection district. They actually have no intention of expanding fire protection district. It's the EMS. So that's my error. I'm sorry. but I
That's
was
okay.
thinking too. So, no, there's no expectation of needing to provide a service to a large area.
I mean, I guess I'll have that same question, if that's the division formula they're gonna use for the ambulance, but that's a different
They're not.
conversation.
They're not, but that's a conversation we need to have. and I'm
Yeah.
thinking it's different
All right.
with that.
That's helpful, thank you.
So, no, so fire protection district basically fixed in place. I mean, we could look at in the future, I think there may be some value to looking at. There might be parts of the town it makes sense to go with it more because of the location.
And well, Hector has the run fire,
They,
don't they? Or
They
do
have
have
parts.
part of,
No, so
part of
they're-
Hector is.
they're in like 4 or 5
Yeah,
floors.
right.
It's bizarre. I'm like,
Right.
you're like this big and you have all like, I wouldn't want to manage any of that, but,
Right,
so
because I
yeah.
mean, they do have a fire station and everything when you drive by.
Yeah, so for that one,
Right.
Yeah. yeah, and they
There's
don't.
one on
serve
414
this.
too.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So, so fire is, you're absolutely right about equipment. They do have a 10-year, I don't have it, and they actually didn't provide it, we can get it if we need it. I don't think they provided it for 10-year replacement, vehicle replacement.
I didn't see it.
Yeah,
They got this on that sheet. they can give us.
yeah, they didn't, I didn't,
It's
yeah.
annotated, but
yeah, they didn't provide that for the meeting this year, but if you want to see a copy of it, I'm sure I can get that. Thanks.
Was this something we're gonna have like a, I just changed the agenda item throughout next year? Anything as we discuss this or? Again, or-
If you want, I mean, I see our fire options. But that frankly, I see the fire maintenance options pretty significant.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean you can't take a different approach if there's will to do it.
That's why, you know, because if we come up with something, and take a post to the board and see.
Yeah.
Do we have a stomach for this or do we just
Yeah.
swallow the pill?
Yeah, I mean, and really it boils down to. If we set up another fire company, we're turning over that budget to them. It's not like the board gets to make some budget, so we wouldn't even have the equipment. The town would not make equipment, so it's maybe the same kind of vote with a different entity, it doesn't exist. So, yeah.
I mean, I'll just say historically, we took a really hard look at this back in 2011, 12. And did a ton of research, and someone was on the board who was very invested in looking into this, and it was the exact same conclusion that you still have now. The options are very limited. They talked to other potential providers, and similarly, we did it more so for the EMS. We did a lot of research on the EMS and
It's where the money is, it's the package dealer. So it's not just fires market, but the investors.
right, and so, yeah, we looked at other options for EMS also. We're not quite on that subject yet, but that's when we made the ambulance district, because we had to do something. And the options were find something else for just basic life support, emergency, medical, because the fire company can do it anymore, or, you know, go with village or another contract. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a real 22, try to find ways that we could have a say more than what you approve the budget, but if you don't approve the budget, too bad, you have to do it anyway, which is the say in both that we have now. But that we couldn't come to the village to consider. We have some, so anyway, I think you're right. It's an ever escalating cost that we get to.
Yeah, and so, because we were just going through the assessment, they did. Because there has been this talk over the increase in doing this 5-year adjustment. The village held off on doing it last year, request of the town. Of implementing it, so for the 22 budget, it was based on, 3-year it's coming, the adjustment is coming, the village is moving in that direction, and they can move with it without us. And because we did have an increased tax base this year because of the reassessment, I prefer triggering with the 20% increase in the year where we have a little bit more cash. Than in the year where we might constrain, so because of our tax cap requirement. So, it was kind of one way or the other, it's not a huge increase. It does have some impact, the fact that their budget, because they're volunteer, it helps to keep their costs are down lower, and in terms of, not going through.
So do we have a number for those? I don't see the 2023 number for. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you.
I can, so as far as how this will impact the tax cap, I can talk to OFC and see if there's, we're not adding a service, but if the formula for a contracted service is changing in such a drastic way, they might be able to relieve a tax cap, but I have no idea if that's possible, but I can ask them what the story would be in a year like that.
The 2023, this kind of number here, though, that is the 75-25 formula.
Yes,
Okay, so that is, at least in this year, it's not really and 2022 was the 3-year average, so
Right.
that's not really,
right.
as you said, I think originally, but just circling back. Very much of a change impact to us at all right now.
Right, it seemed the time to do it because the fire budget itself was effectively flat, so we weren't absorbing a percentage increase there, and it was like, and we had some time to like, okay, because we had, it's gonna be implemented over 5 years, we're doing a 20% adjustment now, 20% more next year, and so on. So,
But it's probably good to in the narrative have that make people aware that it's going to go up.
Yeah.
Because of this change and the fact that this year, with the assessed value was, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the thing I can highlight, that formula is changing, so,
So we started with the easy one.
yeah, right. Exactly.
Is there any more questions? Rich, do you have any questions on fire?
Yeah, well, I mean, on the side, sorry, I'm recovering from COVID, although I tested negative just now, so I'm happy about that. This idea of equity, we've never really thought of this. And there's obviously an inherent unfairness, and everything we pay into the budget mainly goes for capital equipment, but the village owns all the equipment, as Roxanne just said. So is there a way maybe to go back to the village and say, look, we're more than half the budget, right? And we are paying for all this equipment. We don't mind that you're not benefiting yet from the equity because you're not dissolving the fire company. But if you were to dissolve the fire company or merge with another fire company, what happens to all the equity of the equipment? Is the village get 100% of it? It should be dispersed based on all the money everyone's put in over time.
So do you mind if I hop in on this? So when it comes to equipment, I'm guessing they treat it very similarly to the way we do, which is that if we're gonna sell an asset, it counterbalances, it's a revenue that goes into the budget and therefore decreases the impact of expenses for the year that it's sold in. So I think
but
that,
I'm talking about something different, Michelle. I'm not talking about year to year. That's clear. I'm talking about if they liquidate the equipment and don't replace it, if there's a sudden merger with a bigger entity, or they just decide we can't do this anymore. We don't have enough volunteers. We have to figure something else out. And here's all this millions of, equipment that at some point might be liquidated or sold in an event. Right? There's no mechanism for the disbursement of those funds except directly into the village, I think. What happens in that case?
I mean, I would say the probability of what you're talking about is pretty low, right?
It's low, but it's there.
It's more likely that we're gonna absorb another fire company than another fire company is gonna absorb us. There just aren't any bigger fire companies in the area. I mean, I don't see the city taking this on. That would be the only bigger dog in the area.
But Rich, in a situation like that, there's probably some precedents in the legal system around how that would be treated, is my guess.
Right, and I'm thinking maybe in our next contract with them, we put in some language based on finding out what you just said, other historical precedents, that at least we have something there that protects us.
I think it's at least a value to have the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the village have any interest. I mean, this is.
I agree, but I think for our constituents, we need to at least do something. Show that we're thinking about this, because that's the money, our taxpayers' money, and we have no, it's just, we've been through this every year. But I think this idea of equity is an interesting idea that we haven't really talked about. So I'm not saying we should do anything about it now, but it's an interesting thought.
Well, I mean, I could have some light, not a lot, because I could have some light legal research time to find out what.
Yeah,
Because I don't think the village is gonna be able to off the cuff say what the legal process is for doing that. I can hear, I know they're not looking at that. Right
So
now.
this is I would ask some accountants, because this is really an accounting issue. I look at it two ways. We're buying a service. And, it's much like any business, and somebody we do business with. I'm buying something from them, but I don't have any stake in that company. But also, and I see what you guys are saying, but if we're paying for half of it, but we can't own it. So if you're
Right.
saying, gosh, village, you need to share it with us, we're gonna own half the company, we legally can't own So I don't really see any mechanism if it gets pushed, some kind of legal thing, right? Some language that you're trying to draw something up. That we own half this fire truck, which we legally can't own.
Right.
Well, we should,
What's that?
yeah, we should own half of it.
But we can't legally under.
I know. It's a moot point, and we
Yeah.
shouldn't spend any more time on it.
No, but we can do some research on that, Rich. I think it's a valuable point. We can do some research and,
Yeah, at least ask a question.
yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
just ask a question.
Push it on the village a little bit.
Yep.
I mean, it's different than them being a for-profit company and you're saying you contract for something, they're a municipality too, so. I think it's. I mean, I agree, so I guess I do think it's a valid point, but just to look into and think about, that's all. I mean, I'm not trying to. Encourage any sort of conflict or animosity with the village over this, believe me. It just doesn't go anywhere good, but I do think it's worth, as Rich said, for our constituents understanding that. Cause it's, I mean, it's probably a similar issue. And much more so with the ambulance, actually, so.
Yeah,
Well, the
And
truth
so,
is, it's less an issue.
Overall, we should understand it, because people ask us about it. And it's,
Yeah. I mean, it's less an issue with the ambulance because their main cost is payroll, not the physical ambulance. But in the fire, it's switched. All the money is for the equipment, and we have volunteers mainly. So it's much more weight on equipment side on the fire than on the ambulance.
I'm happy to check into that, Rich.
And there's building and everything like that, that's. what I'm talking
Right.
about.
There
Right.
is, that, I mean, so the intention that Lisa's been expressed to me in multiple meetings is that that would have to be, we would have to go away for debt, right? For debt was not freezing in taxes, money to pay to build that beautiful fire. Right, so, Gordon had been in conversations, I know, with New's office for quite a while, trying to get money to bring the water assist. So, you know, they put money in, I believe they put money, put a congressional request, and we did our congressional request, and they did that. So they're looking for outside money to fund.
Yeah,
the
that's
fire.
not the town hall.
What?
It's in the empire. Not the town hall.
I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't go delve into that.
Well,
Yeah.
that's helpful to know anyway, because I just heard that discussed a lot, and people
Yeah.
being concerned that the cost could go way up because of that, so. Again, it's a good thing,
Yeah.
public to know that we're.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, so that's the latest I've heard on that, so basically they need $8.5 million. Tentatively, so it's too fast, they're not getting it from us, so.
At least not right.
No. No. Okay, anything else on fire? Okay, let's go on to the fun stuff. Okay.
Do you mind if I take a step back? As far as, so this is the first year that we've done these line by line meetings before the publishing of the tentative budget, which procedurally is to me a monumental improvement to the way that this gets put together because of the way that we have to treat the tentative budget once it's released. So I just want to thank everybody for participating in this, because what it does is put us in a position to have a tentative budget that is vetted by board members. So thank you. So there's lots of things to pick apart, and I'm looking forward to it.
I think you're just delaying me and have some conversation. Okay.
Well, I forgot to say that at the beginning of the meeting, so.
Okay, so the ambulance is where the wretchedness starts to get into place. So just to be very clear about this, we are continuing to be, we're continuing to be charged on a 3-year call average. That formula has not changed, that's the formula, so that's my knowledge, has been in place for many years. And that hasn't changed at all. The large issue we're seeing with EMS is with the same thing we're seeing in healthcare, which is the costs are just completely escalating, number one, you know, in order to pay for the services and to keep staff. It's increasingly expensive to do. And we're also seeing, even though the costs go up, the reimbursement for services is low. We're not seeing, you know, Medicare and Medicaid are not reimbursing that. You know, if it costs $700 for a visit, and they're reimbursing it for $200. Therein lies the problem, so it's getting shifted to the tax base to pay for the source.
What about the private? I mean, that was the argument, that was private. insurance was gonna help them with that. Did they pay more than Medicare?
So, yeah, I think it depends on the company. So what I can tell you is that,
Well, I just mean from our, we see as our income. from-
yeah, we're coming back at, what is it about, I can't remember the exact, like 20%, 25%, pretty low, what we're getting reimbursed.
Oh, for what's being billed?
Uh.
Haven't dug into that really.
No, I mean, in terms of the revenue total for coming in to offset the
Oh.
expenditure, it's somewhere in that range.
I mean, you wanna look at the actuals from last year or something
You
like
wanna pull
that?
that up while I can continue what we're looking at broadly?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that huge important.
No, I think
Just
it's,
curious.
no, but I think it actually really is, and that's why, at the fire EMS meeting with the municipalities, the EMS director is relatively new in the village, and I'm pushing for, and he was amenable to, having a joint meeting to look at, the rates we're charging, because typically we have piggybacked off the village, but the way I look at it is that if we're charged, if our rates are staying fixed and the costs are going up. And that's happening, it's going to happen on a consistent basis. That we need to be looking at our rates to make sure, even if we're not realistically getting reimbursed, what we don't want to do is charge X dollars, right? For a set period of time, even though costs are going up, and then make it in 1 year, make a huge leap to try and recalibrate the chart. Because I think it's, even if it's unlikely that we're going to get reimbursed the true value, it's important to recognize what the true value of that cost is. And be able to have it, in my opinion, reflected in the rates themselves, because I don't want to keep the rates flat. Like I said, so what Joel from EMS is going to do is he's pulling the rates from all of our area municipalities as well as theirs. The village is actually looking, Joel's actually looking at the value of bringing billing in-house for their territory, because they're billing in the village, but they're also billing outside our service area, because, and herein lies what my particular anger is geared towards, which is because we're a public ambulance company, there's a requirement for mutual aid. And just this past weekend alone, the village and the ambulance was in the city of Ithaca 3 times. Within the city of Ithaca 12 times in July, because of challenges that Ithaca's experiencing related to ambulance services there, related to policing services, which impact ambulance services, which are now calling our ambulance to Ithaca and back. And to me, subsidizing Ithaca is ludicrous, because Ithacans don't pay any money in taxes for ambulance service.
It's just a complete it's just a bangs call.
It's just a bank's call, and because bank is private, they don't have to respond to mutual aid. There's no requirement that they respond, but because we're public, we have to respond. And I'm concerned about a constituent having a heart attack, and it takes 20 minutes for an ambulance to get out.
So how about COVID?
Well, you know what,
They're in Ithaca.
well, I'm concerned about COVID too.
No,
but I
no,
also,
I'm just
you know,
saying, we've
Yeah.
expanded the distance. That was bothering me as this all involved.
They don't get paid for those unless they transport.
Well, they can provide, they charge, they only charge if there's service, if the transport happens. Banks charges whether there's transport or not.
Or
So,
mutual aid.
yes, so if bank shows up at your doorstep in Trumansburg for agencies, yeah, you're gonna be paying. Trumansburg definitely don't. Because they don't transport. So, the reality is that the village is looking in, there's a deterioration of services of not just in, I'm not saying there's deterioration just in our area. There's deterioration in our birth rate. So Enfield's looking at, they're getting very poor responses. So they're now in conversation with the village about entering. The problem is that, and what I push the village on, is the problem is if we add any additional service area, we do not have sufficient equipment to service this. And so basically, we are maxed out with 1 rig on our current service area, and I think we're underserved with that personally. But if we add, say we add Enfield to the mix, Enfield can't afford a second rig, and the second rig is gonna double all the costs. Because it's gonna double personnel, it's gonna double equipment. It's most likely gonna, not maybe it won't double insurance, but it's gonna come close, you're looking at doubling of almost everything, right? And Enfield is not gonna be able to afford to pay for that all by himself, right? So it's gonna shift the burden to us. And so what I'm pushing the village to do is adding one small municipality has a huge financial implication for it. They need to stay, if they're gonna scale up, they need to scale up sizably enough of that in service areas paying for that. In my opinion, the village, I can guarantee you, they're looking to scale. It's coming one way or the other. And what I don't wanna have happen, I would rather push them to expand in a larger area at once, rather than a small area gradually and then shift the burden to us, because how do you realistically go up 10% every year, 8%, 9%? It's gonna be catastrophic.
So there, those mutual aid calls are pure. Because.
If they transport, yes,
Well, they don't share in revenue.
but they also don't share, and they will argue that they don't share in loss either, 30 years of loss.
No, not, they transport for 5 weeks. It's income for them.
Yeah.
Those of us that quasi own the payment system, are paying capital costs.
Right, and if that rig is up at 5 points, and somebody calls for service, they're gonna get banks. And the problem is, the banks is having, huge issues in the city of Ithaca. Because their ambulance crew, they're not allowed to provide service unless law enforcement is there to secure the scene. So I mean, if it's a heart attack, one thing, but if there's anything danger, possibly danger related, they're literally having ambulance crews sit outside buildings waiting for law enforcement to show up.
Is that an internal policy for banks or?
That's a nationwide,
Oh.
you do not send EMS personnel,
Their insurance.
yeah, you don't send them into an unsecured scene, it's just way too dangerous.
Yeah.
They have no way to protect themselves.
Can the ambulance charge our ambulance? Charge a mutual aid, even if they don't transport, but not within our taxpayer realm? No, but like if they're going to mutual aid
Yeah.
outside of our area,
I honestly don't know that question.
because
That's a good
that
question.
seems like it's a
We gotta
feedback with
transport.
like, when we have, then if mutual aid has to come from somewhere that one of our taxpayers has to pay more, then at least the budget's being offset if, when they go to mutual aid, because it's putting a strain on the coverage of our area. I don't know if they've thought about that, or maybe that's a question to look into.
Well, and I don't know, my guess is to some degree, it might not be. They might not be charging mutual aid when they don't transport, because one of them made a comment that it's the village's advantage if they're providing heavy service in someplace like Enfield and mutual aid, but they might have been maybe better off bringing in full. So they might not be, because, if it's pure profits, what would call regardless, that it would be in village's interest to keep them outside the districts. But bringing them inside the village would mean there would be a consistent income source, which suggests to me that they're not charging. But I can find out.
Or have they thought about it? And I mean, so Ithaca's ever come into the fold, right? So if that's become an issue, then. I guess there's two sides to that, so we have to balance it. And then my other question is, has there been much discussion of something that's more like, in terms of some level of coverage, like a kind of a basic life support thing that's just a vehicle, that's not an ambulance that goes out with
Yes.
people, because there was a lot of talk about that back in the day when it was like,
We talked about the cars.
oh, yeah, I don't know, but
They
just
could use
in,
them.
I can get an update on that, yeah.
just in general, that was the question.
So that's a fly car, and one of the things we did adjust the budget to add $5,000 to reserves. In that meeting, and I was supposed 5,000, but 5,000 towards the fly car. Right now, Joel is serving as the head of EMS. He's serving in his personal vehicle as the fly car. So he's actually the second, so if there's a second call that comes in while the ambulance is out, Joel's the one who's heading out. And, and so the village would like to get to the point of actually having a fly car. My point to them was, it was like, okay, well, first off, we can't afford to do it right now, because you can't increase budget as much, you can't increase our cost as much, and you can pay for that simultaneously. So how do we find the money for that outside? And is there any fundraising options for it? And they were like, well, you can't fundraise for them because they're, you know, they're village department as opposed to fire. And so I was pushing them in the meeting that they basically EMS needs, because there are nonprofit, ambulance services in other parts of the state. They're all failing, but there's ways to set up friends of, there's ways to encourage situations where, and actually one of the things that we have very tentatively talked about is, and I mean, very tentatively, like I explored whether or not it was legal to do, is the LVC that we're setting up for Camp Barton. Because it's an LVC, it's not being set up just for Camp Barton, because you can't set up an LVC just for that, right? And you have their legal way. We could actually, because it might be possible to use LVC as a funding route, even if it's just for application, to funnel money to the ambulance, to offset ambulance costs and go out and apply for money that way, because all municipalities are from the ambulance. So that might be an exterior third-party way to fundraise for, because I don't think it's possible for them to activate to pay for another vehicle. But I think the flag are good.
If the model talk about if the ambulance system truly is growing, that you want.
For
Your finances are never gonna be transparent.
for mutual aid, you always have to send it AL against like support, you know, I mean, there's just a lot of questions there that how you meet your obligations and pay and keep the public safe. So,
Right.
You know, it's complicated.
It is.
Thank you
And
for all you say, not.
no,
It's a
I,
lot of work.
it is a lot of work. I
And it's
think-
very eggshelly.
It is very exciting. Yeah, and you know, and it's one of the things you don't want an ambulance not be able to show up. But right now, you've got Joel is basically just like doing it. And so what happens if he sleeps through a call? It's, you know, it's not like he's on duty 24 hours a day. Like I'm concerned about that model. Like that I was looking at that, I'm like, really? That's how the village is running that right now, which I appreciate that that's might be the situation they're in, because we're not funding a flight car and the staff personnel to go with it. But it's like, we gotta do better than this. I mean, yeah. Your personal vehicle should not be our.
Yeah.
partner. No.
They use company moves on.
Right, well, and that was not being done to the best of my knowledge by his predecessor.
Right. So that's.
So, exactly, so it's like, yeah,
We lost Rich.
it'll be back.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great question, Roxanne, about the mutual aid we charge. I don't know. Based on just what they were saying, kind of hand part thing, I don't think they're charging for non-payment.
Or would they consider, does it make any difference? Can it be considered? You know,
Yeah.
coming on issue with staff. and- Yeah, for mutual aid, because it's coming back to cost our animal system taxpayers more, because of their way out there, when banks or some for-profit company that does charge for just the visit comes. So if they're down there in Ithaca and then you call, you have to pay, banks comes, you don't have to pay if we. And so we're kind of, our ambulances, because we're limited in the vehicles and the staff that we have by what we can afford. Are, you know, gone because of this increase and. I think that was.
Yeah, they're not paying.
Dealing with it,
They're-
right.
Yeah, we're subsidizing their, I mean, we're subsidizing them.
And that's kind of crazy, so I think it's something to.
That's what you're trying to do, is trying to get the utilization up.
Right,
You know, because the more you keep it on, the more you keep it working.
yeah,
Theoretically, the less really costly. But at least one of the 5 things you said about the Cobra, this Cobra tries to do their business model. I think they use the business model for where they're responding. Because they Cobra's was a. I think it was a volunteer fire. Or maybe the one.
Okay, yes, it's the South Seneca one.
South Center.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it turns out apparently South Seneca has gotten new administration
because they
and.
were almost sort of under-
Yeah, and we got the update that they actually have like pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and are like financially,
Yeah.
like, I don't know, sustainable, but financially like. Together, enough to still exist. Right,
How are you doing? What's your business model?
yeah, so again, but I think they are a volunteer one, and I think, and we're seeing the demise of volunteer.
Mhm.
Services working.
Great.
So I do know that Anna Kelly did push through, a bill related to rural services, rural emergency services. I believe it was in the last, schedule for the legislature, but now what they're working on is something like $1 billion investment in ambulance services in the state. That would be both for urban and rural. And, I mean, whether or not that's gonna come through, but the reality is, I think New York State, personally, I think New York State should be subsidizing emergency services, just. I think it's something we just need to provide, and it's very expensive, so, you can't have tax cap hands.
What about the Tompkins community funds for municipalities?
That's a tough idea. That is a big part of that,
That's an idea.
or fly car,
Yeah.
or
Anything worth
Yeah.
talking
The
about.
county has a lot of reason to
Right.
respond to a request like
And it
that.
actually
Sure.
is kind of COVID related too, you know, and just in
Oh,
terms of
absolutely.
public health and mental health, and so that's a good idea for so, like, you know, maybe talk, and it would be a joint request from, you know, 2 municipalities in the county, so. And it actually probably helps other municipalities in the county with this mutual aid requirement things, so. It's a really good idea. That, I mean, it would have to be implemented quite quickly for municipal government to get to act on, but maybe, you know. I don't think, it didn't seem like the application was super complicated.
no, I bet, I mean, I can't really work it out hard to run the numbers on it, but
Right, it's been thought about a fair
Yeah.
amount, and
good
the
idea.
EMS, the head of EMS, Joel, I think he says,
Yeah.
must have that kind of in his head, because he's been worrying about it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just worried about the liability. There's no vehicles for respond to emergency circumstances, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, that makes it lit.
Used to be that we had a community station wagon, you take your neighbor down to the hospital.
Yeah.
Somehow we've gotten away from that.
Well,
Yeah.
liability
It's
has
a lot
changed a
more.
lot.
Yeah,
I mean, we always want to help the neighbor.
absolutely.
Somebody falls down, you want to pick them up.
Yeah.
You don't sit there and go, "Ah, I'm afraid you're gonna sue me, neighbor," but just let you lay there.
Right, so at any rate, we are where we are with this, and we're at 9% almost increase.
Yeah.
Next year, right?
Yeah.
But we've at least tried to think of some ideas of how to talk
How,
with the.
how are we doing on collecting our
What's that, Rich?
receipts, Michelle? How are we doing on collecting from, reimbursements? Are we in budget? Are we?
Year-to-date reimbursements.
Yeah, so, Rich, you probably can't see the screen very well. Let me
No, I can't.
increase it here. It was also in the attachment from the email yesterday.
Yeah,
Our year to date, which I have to double check because I know there is a lag. I think that
Yeah.
actually is only through maybe July, maybe June or something like that. But our current projection is that 89,000 for this year.
okay.
And the percentages along the bottom here are, in 2021, that 19.39, these are actuals, so, that is how much ambulance billing represents the total cost of the contract.
Right,
So that's how much it offsets it. We budgeted a little bit lower percentage, in this year's budget, but with our end of year projection, we're looking at that 21.43%. And then just for some reference, in 2020, that number was, the ambulance billing represented 17% of the contract costs. So
I was right, I thought it was 20, so I was close.
pretty close. And this is actually one of the points that I want to discuss. There's 2 figures out of these that I want some board feedback on, and the ambulance billing is one of them. Roxanne, do you mind taking a look and see what does it say for the 3-year average for ambulance billing in that historical?
Is it this?
Yep,
This
yep.
big,
Yeah, the last, second to last column.
oh,
There's a-
3-year average,
Yeah.
okay, so ambulance,
I think it's about 89,
is it? What's it under?
Um,
Am I
1289, SM 1289.
I don't see it on this, 1289, I found it, okay, it's called other income here. The 3-year average is 89,352.
Yeah, so that,
And the 5-year average is also 89. 5, 3, 2, 3,
Yeah.
numbers, different orders.
The pandemic definitely had some wackiness when it comes to ambulance billing, but our end of year projection and the current model for the 2023 budget is that $89,000 number. So I think, I mean, I feel pretty good about those, but, in the draft tentative for 2023, me feeling good about that 89,000 number comes from appropriating what I would consider, a reasonable, but on the small end for fund balance, that 18,240. Knowing what we have coming in our future, I think, doing an assessment and maybe a fund balance policy specific to the SM fund would be wise. And the reason why the ambulance billing revenue for 2023 is connected to fund balance is because if for some reason we overestimate that revenue, it will come from fund balance to offset the costs. So, basically, I'm wondering two things. One, is the board comfortable with this projection of 89,000 that matches the 3 and 5 year average? And then the fund balance number, if you want to appropriate more fund balance in order to decrease the amount of property taxes that we're levying in this fund, I think we should come up with a plan, a multi-year plan for the fund balance, and maybe, propose a policy for fund balance appropriation in the EMS fund.
I mean, is there very much fund balance at the end?
There is because of the ambulance billing revenue.
But doesn't it all go back into? I don't know.
So,
You're not talking about like unassigned fund balance that accumulates or something.
yes, that's what it is. Yep.
So correct me if I'm wrong, basically, traditionally, we've used all the tax levies almost exclusively, almost pay whatever bill the village gives us. And then any income we make, it goes into the fund balance, is that correct?
Correct.
So
Yep.
when it would accumulate by being more income than we put in the budget to
Yep.
use for that, is how you're accumulating.
Yep. Yep.
Well, why don't we just pay them all? I mean, we don't need fund balance with the ambulance as much, do we?
Well, knowing what's coming, we do,
So
is what I'm suggesting.
the early conversations have been that it's not, at least I don't see it as sustainable to put 10%. If we need to plan for potentially 10%, 7 to 10% increase on an annual basis, that will see healthcare costs increasing. I mean, if we're seeing that, and we're also seeing the fact that reimbursement is not keeping pace with actual costs, then we're gonna need potentially in the future, way more so than we have previously, to use the reserves to level out the budget, so we're not overburdening the taxpayer any single year with some huge increase. And so we're trying to level the budget with that. In the future, would be the idea with reserves. And we think we're gonna have more need to do that if these costs continue to escalate with the tax cap.
How big is that fund balance?
Right now it's projected about 140. So it's a chunk of change. Yep.
Okay, so 18 is okay.
I think every year we need to pass some of the burden on to the
Yeah.
taxpayer.
Yeah.
But
Just pick a number and go with it.
So this draft budget
Yeah.
doesn't include any. fund balance.
Yeah, but-
The 18,240.
you described how we did it.
Oh, I
already.
yeah,
So
Oh,
it's
that's right here.
18,240 and it's still an 8% increase. Tax.
It's a
payers.
0.76%. So this is the fund balance appropriation, and this is the percentage increase from last year of the tax levy for the SM fund. Is that 0.76?
No, I'm sorry. So that's the, but it's not the levy. It's 0.76. I'm confused by those two numbers.
Yeah, so this 8.32 is the increase of the contract.
Right, the contract increase.
Yeah, and this
And
is
that's
the
the
increase in the tax
Tax
levy.
level increases that because of using the fund balance.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
And increasing proportionally how much we're projecting for the ambulance billing revenue.
Right, but you, looks like it was projected last year relative to what we've gotten over the 5-year average.
Correct. And, you know, this 32.68 represents a huge bite as to why that tax levy only increased by that 0.76%.
It was really hard last year, if I recall correctly, it was really hard to predict how much revenue we would get in 2022, because 2021 and 2020.
Right.
Year.
I mean, I listened to the budget discussions, but it's different. You can ask me a question and understand it, so.
Yeah, so what I can tell you, my twin goals are to figure out how we possibly lower the cost of how much is getting pushed onto our taxpayers, but also we need to increase the revenue that's coming in.
That's it. So listen, before we shouldn't we know before we do this budget whether we're gonna, our fees are going up or not? So when are we gonna have that info from the village so we can figure this out?
Well, we don't set our fees, our fees won't be officially set until January. I would suspect we're gonna be past having we're gonna definitely be past having the tentative budget. We might be past having the formal budget done before anything is finalized. Because it's not just not just getting information from the village, it's also having a conversation with our other municipal partners to understand, like, are we, because there was an idea, this would be the first time apparently it's been done too. The other municipal leaders were interested in us collectively collaborating on how we're addressing billing and how we're addressing rates. That conversation apparently has never substantively happened before.
Because we have to set our own rates,
Right.
right? But, and people do, yeah.
Well, we've set our own rates based on the village's rates.
Yeah.
We have here the village, but the other municipalities might not be doing it, and Joel was gonna help pull rates from other municipalities outside of our ambulance district. So we can get an idea, are we on par with what's being
Yeah.
traditionally offered or not?
How does that your name?
Chris?
What?
Chris, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that's what he was doing.
I don't know,
Yeah, he's still there.
he's not doing that work.
No,
for
I
us.
know he's not doing
Yeah,
that.
yeah, so.
Good resource stuff.
Yeah, and I actually, when I talked to legal counsel about it too, our ambulance billing service for other municipalities has provided rates from other municipalities, because it's actually public, but because they're private company, they sometimes let us do it, the medics, we might be able to pull numbers from there. And I just don't think, I think we have to go with a number, this, for a tentative budget. And it seems using the number from last year, because even if we raise rates, it doesn't mean we're gonna make any more money.
Why?
We could, charge them 100% of the cost, it's whatever the insurance reimbursement, so minus the insurance reimbursement changing. We could make the exact same amount of money. So,
Well, it's possible, but you don't give yourself a chance if you don't have the higher rates to get the reimbursement.
I agree with you, Rich, I just don't think I'm gonna have those numbers in play in time for the budget. So.
Well,
I'm sorry.
all right, so I think this is, it's very complicated to making it. I think you just call. I don't know that you need all the research of all the municipalities you're saying for the budget, go do what we normally do, piggyback on the village rates.
Well, the village is looking at their rates and they're not under the same timeline constraints. I'm sorry, I gotta say this with my colleague.
Because their budget is in
Yeah.
March.
Hey, Nate, how are you?
Who's the Hague this meeting?
I
What was
am-
that?
The Hague this meeting.
So,
You?
yeah, sure. Well, probably technically Rich as the deputy
Oh, that's right.
supervisor.
You're in charge, Rich. You're the Al Hague.
What?
Caitlin will be back in an hour, so. So if we wanna circle back when she returns to this conversation, we can move on to A fund, if that makes sense.
I'm good with this.
Okay.
Just look at whenever the rates come up,
I mean, maybe you know,
even if it's delayed, like a year delayed or something.
maybe you know the answer to this, Michelle, but like, as I recall from the discussions past, and I wasn't obviously in the most recent ones. We match our rates to the village, because there's that weird thing about where one argument I had heard was like, well, if you're a village, depending on where it goes. If you're in the village versus into town and you're a resident, you pay a different amount if the rates aren't the same. And so we decided, the town decided, well, right, right.
It's so
yeah,
much simpler.
the
It's
town,
just
right.
so much simpler and it makes sense. And then everybody can understand it. If
Right.
it- And
So
it just makes,
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
we just started to do that.
Um, it's been,
Was it last year?
I mean, I think
I thought it was
it's
from
been
the
a while.
beginning.
Yeah, I don't think I don't know if it's from the beginning or not, but
Well, it was pretty close to it. There was a huge discussion about that when we made this and decided to go to building, which was a big argument in the town, as it was. So there was a lot of opposition to it. Going.
I think it was a year or two in when we mirrored the village. But we were getting nothing until 2000, until I was on the board. So I think we just keep it simple. I don't think you have to do all this rigmarole, but
Yeah, I think if we just wait for the village, even if it's after this budget, we can do it for the following budget.
yeah.
I think this is good
Okay.
enough. I'm good with moving on.
okay.
And what
Are you guys
happens when
okay?
people can't pay? They don't have insurance.
Well, we don't,
Yeah, so there's technically a policy that you can apply for forgiveness, but I don't think MedX doesn't submit it to collections, and I think they bill them 3 times or something like that, but.
So we don't have any other fund or anything that helps people with that. We just don't bill them.
Right,
we don't build, yeah.
I just.
That's my
wondering if there was
understanding.
any other fund issue related to
We
that.
received a couple.
Okay, that's all. I didn't know if it's evolved to,
Yes.
right, and what the difference, what the changes.
Mhm.
That was just, I mean, that was a
Just-
huge part of the controversy.
Do you know if that is a letter or notes came out with the billing?
so technically, every bill that goes out from MedX should include our forgiveness policy or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
That's what we requested. but,
Yeah.
you know,
They weren't doing it, yeah.
Right,
they just have their own-
Maybe we should like post that somewhere or something like.
on the
Well, it's
website.
hard to, you know,
I'm pretty sure it is on ours.
Yeah.
if you've had that sort of trauma of having an ambulance, it's not really.
Oh, if they would do it, yeah, for sure, but as another place people could look. at
Because
their
if they start
concern.
over billing personnel,
Yeah,
you know.
no, I'm
might-
seeing as another place to make sure people really have that information. Because I think more and more with COVID and the financial stress that everybody's under,
Mhm.
that's an issue, you know, it's gonna be worse for people.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, I don't know. I don't think we've had any complaints from people about the policy.
Right, I just think it's good to re-recognize it because we're in this. World, COVID, in fact, world.
Okay. All right, next.
Yeah, so the plan was to go into the A fund and we have a different schedule than we did when we first released this plan, so. Carissa, I'm hoping we could, just sort of go as much in a row as possible and do your budget as it comes up, if that's okay.
Is that
Okay.
this?
Those are the sub budgets. It's the other large sheet, so you're gonna need both of those. And if it's okay with everybody, I'm gonna go use the facility.
Yeah, right.
basically A
Me too. I
bio
know.
break. So I will be right back. I'm gonna leave this up and then you can think of all your questions. So what I was just, what I was just asking Carissa was that when we get to the town clerk office, we'll do that right now, opposed to circling back at 11 a.m. So yeah, I'll be back. And early, because whatever, whatever builds into the next meeting.
Did you see that house that burnt down there in the office?
Where?
You know, where you're driving in, and they're going Buffalo Street.
Oh,
It's between.
yeah, oh,
13
I was driving to Ithaca and I was like, up on, coming down the hill and I was like, whoa.
Yeah, so they're
that's
turning it down. Yeah, so I guess yesterday or today, so developing trucks, they had a big excavator. They, I guess, sort of imploded it. And it's fascinating to see how they do that in a small space. So he drove it up on the pile, so it was sitting there. So he's perched up like this big machine and driving through. And so then they have the trucks, there must be asbestos or something, because they have big plastic sheets that want to eat the trucks. And a big water truck. So they go on this work, they're providing. Way home, see, it's just probably being cleaned up, Just fascinating, the big firms, that know how to do that. Just make it easy.
Says his Congressman has COVID.
Listen, I gotta make a phone call. I'll be back in a couple. of
Okay.
minutes. Okay.
Chris and I will make a bunch of decisions here.
Oh, no, you won't.
Yeah. It's just us, we just passed a whole bunch of things. Just
Take the rest of them on shopping. Indeed. Yeah,
get along about.
I didn't have. Yeah.
Long wheelbase kayak.
Yeah, I didn't have one.
I have a little big, by the way.
So just a couple notes about this, color coding here. In the bright yellow, those are things that in the draft tentative phase are numbers that I know I need to circle back to. Looks like we lost Rich again.
Yeah, he said he had been called.
Oh, gotcha, okay. I think probably for continuity purposes, it makes sense just to call it a public meeting for the whole time, even though. Do we have to adjourn the meeting if there's only two here?
We're not,
Okay,
well.
technically,
It's not really wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, he's coming back, or Caitlin might come back in, and we'd have to reopen it.
right, okay, yeah, right.
We're
okay.
not just voting on it. We
Right.
couldn't vote on anything, because we don't have.
Right. So, yeah, the stuff in green is, because Caitlin couldn't be here today, I want to make sure that we do certain budget lines with her here. And then, the separate meetings are in that yellowish color, so, so once again, this year we have those sub budgets that, we started a couple years ago, which I find incredibly helpful. So there are these two documents that you have to sort of go back and forth with. So starting with the town board lines, 10.1 and 0.4. At the budget retreat, the board wanted the tentative budget to reflect a 2% increase. And I would encourage us to, once we go through the budget and see how the tax levy flushes out, I would encourage the board to do a 4% if things are looking good, which, preliminarily, the tax rate does look reasonable. And the tax levy looks reasonable, so, I'm actually gonna highlight that in yellow. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that, as far as if we're,
For the one word.
yeah,
Okay, so it
Um,
looks like the others are 4%.
right, which is
Okay.
what we discussed at the board retreat, is to keep the board at 2 and increase everybody by 4, full-time elected officials and staff by 4%, but, I do think it's a good idea to look at that, circle back to that, which I think the next H1 session would be a good one to do that at, so. So,
Yeah, it's not very much.
mm-mm,
I'm not saying it should or shouldn't happen, but it's not gonna massively change.
right.
Tax levy.
Yeah, and I think originally the idea was due to optics, if we had this big
Yeah, no, I
tax
agree.
levy, So I think it's worth considering a 4% increase for the town board fee. So. Or the town board PS rather. For the CE, line. There's extra money in there. So it's listed in the sub budgets there, so if there's any questions about that or requests for changes to that. This is where that historical sheet comes in handy. You can see what that CE line has looked like. It's been fairly low. You know, that town board CE line has been pretty low historically, so. So any thoughts on that or?
I mean, if someone actually went to the annual meeting.
Right.
$500, but
Right,
you know, maybe that's just something to take as it comes.
right. Yeah, and the
Now that
trainings
the meeting
is
You know, in person again.
the AOT.
Yeah,
They're planning on doing it in person.
right. So I'm saying it costs more to put it in the city than to do it.
Right, and that $1,000 is also in there.
Right,
But
but I mean, you know. It seems like it's probably okay with this.
Okay.
If, you know, there's other places to find it, there's a big need
right, well, we have
to
to
want to go.
Michael, do you have any thoughts on 10.1 or 10.4?
I was just looking. Usually I like to start at the bottom line and work backwards, so it's even gone from essentially 900,000 to 1,400,000. So just to figure out if that's the youth programs that drove that up so much.
You're talking about
Yeah,
the,
so it looks like we'll increase by 400. This year.
mhm. Well, a good chunk of that is the capital work that needs to be done on the town hall. And also the reserves.
Adding to reserves.
Adding to reserves. Remember that one.
Where is that?
Yes,
That's what they're going down the lines, is that right? To get to, or what's the process we're doing? Are we getting up to the bottom or down?
yeah, so, right, yeah, I think that stuff will come out in the wash, you know, as we review this. So. Yeah. Those you're coming to all the meetings, right?
Yeah,
So we'll be able to, so all of,
well,
those
anyway,
big
what I
things.
like to look at, because we went over in the first session, so I like to look at the big ones, because some of the numbers we don't really matter. You know, so I don't need to go line by line. It's like, okay, it's a percentage of that.
Okay.
'Cause we're gonna run out.
Yeah. Yep.
What's the bright yellow highlighting supposed to?
That's
indicate?
me needing to circle back, just it's for my own stuff, it's things that I know, like,
It's not
um,
anything for us to particularly.
yeah.
Consider it for-
wait, what?
Is that Michelle?
Yes, yes, it is, yeah. Yeah, the yellow are numbers that I know we're gonna have to circle back to.
For you, or
Oh,
what's your?
nope. Nope, those are my initials.
Okay.
So, I guess we'll scoot down to the town clerk lines. And I don't know, based on what Michael, you just said, what do you wanna look at today?
Well, I don't want to usurp the meeting, but if there's, which one did, were you at?
Town clerk,
Yeah, so I didn't see
yeah, there's no huge
nothing.
bumps there.
So, except I just have a question, so the deputy clerk is less than it was in the past years.
Yeah, he's starting at a lower rate than prior. clerk.
Okay. Okay, so it's just a reflection of the level she's starting.
But also there's 10 less hours a week,
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
which
okay,
is the real difference.
all right,
Just
there's that.
Yeah, make sure you have. enough.
And so how many,
Money
what
to
is the
keep her.
deputy clerk is, how many hours? a week?
20,
Okay, and it was 30.
right?
And so you, from experience, felt like 20 works well enough.
Yeah, that's what we can do.
But you think it's gonna be that way through the whole year, like, is it okay? Leave it like this?
Yeah, we can look at it again, this, when our budget season, we can see.
But you feel like for this whole year that, that's what's going on.
Alrighty, so, it's basically, if there's no other further discussion about the clerk's meetings, it's the lines in white that I want to discuss today because the stuff in green, Caitlin should be there for. So maybe when she comes up at 11, we can start those. So is it okay if we go through the white lines at this point? Is that all right with everybody? The way we're doing it?
Non-shooting.
Right, correct.
Yeah, or I mean, you could just let us know, just post down and.
Sure,
For we can, yeah, we'll look down and see. I
right.
mean, not much is really changed.
That central communication CE line, which is, based on a request last year, you'll see those gray lines to the left. So this is line 37.
Right.
Yeah, they're the.
The ones you can't see.
Oh, the numbers.
The invisible ones.
No, the gray number, you mean?
Yes,
Okay.
yep.
I thought
yep.
it was line, like a writing.
So it's line 37
Yep.
there. And that is a big increase, due to, the software that we need to, so in order to comply with that audit, the OSC audit, and I think we discussed this, when we were talking about the IT RFP, that Microsoft is moving to an annual subscription versus purchasing it once and then having it age out. So this is a new annual cost, is this $7,000 for,
And that's a recurring cost.
Yeah.
Okay.
so this is just the modern era, that we're working in. Yeah, so, right now we don't have the actual quote. But, where's Rich? We don't have the actual quote, but we're, right now it's modeled at an 8% increase just to be safe, and that's based on broker feedback. We haven't had a claim, so if we can't do better than that, then I'm gonna have some, I'm gonna push back on it. Because we are a very low claim organization when it comes to insurance, so.
Would you get that?
Carriers aren't really willing to provide quotes until
Yeah.
towards the end of the year
Right.
because of the fact that anything could happen between now and then, so. Last year, I think they finalized the quote towards the end of October.
Oh, so you just have a placeholder.
Yeah,
Okay.
unfortunately, it's just gotta be the way that we do it. So right now, the contingency account is where the 30,000 for the community funding is sitting, so that's why that number is so much bigger.
Well, why isn't it in its own account line? I mean,
The
I always
community
had understood that contingencies were for just
This is
really
just,
unanticipated.
this is
things.
just for this phase of the budget until we know,
Depends on
because
what requests we get and what lines they want.
it's dotted throughout, so I'm
Yeah.
just doing it as a placeholder so that I don't have to go back through
So
and.
you're More than just the beginning of funding.
Correct, yep,
But
Yep.
that's only 30,000.
yep.
So I still wanted to raise with regard to the contingency fund, that still makes it like $55,000. I always understood, and maybe I'm wrong, so sorry if I am, that contingency funds are supposed to be things that was always like $10,000, $15,000, like things that might come up that you totally didn't anticipate. And if there are things that we think at that level of expenditure might happen and have to come out of there, I think they should be in the line that we anticipate them, because we could always modify and move the budget if it has to go to another line. But I just think for transparency for people, that's a huge amount of money to just have sitting in a contingency account for undefined things that might happen.
So
So where it's always been on.
And it, you know, this last year was 65,000 and you projected that maybe you'll spend 10.
well, that's,
No, it's always been.
so
Historically.
the contingency, doesn't, the actual expense out of the contingency doesn't reflect how much we use year after year, because when you do use contingency, you do move it to the expense account, so it's a tricky historical thing that you can't actually easily tell how much you spent on a contingency. I mean, we could keep a separate
But
record.
then where we've always funded those community.
No,
Or
no,
there's someplace else.
yep, yeah, they go into different lines.
But I mean, the end of year expense would be you took it out of there and put it somewhere else. It wasn't. All I'm saying is you haven't used that much of it for anything if you're not projecting that you're going to. At least the way this accounting sheet works.
So the other thing about the contingency account is, it was a couple years ago that I was asked to not put contingency into sub budgets, but to increase the contingency account through that lens, a more transparent budgeting process. So instead of buffering lines, we have a bigger contingency account for when those overages happen.
But why do we think we need them? It doesn't seem like we have them historically, what have they been? And maybe they should incorporate it to those lines. It doesn't have to be a contingency. It's just that I think you're gonna spend.
The other thing I'll say is that contingency right now is directly offset by appropriated fund balance. So the contingency account isn't affecting the tax levy. So the having contingency in one spot versus buried in different expense lines, I think is a easier way for me to put the budget together. But Roxana, what you're asking is historically, what has been appropriated out of contingency for each year?
No, I guess I'm just saying that it seems like if there are reasons to think that we're gonna spend, we're gonna need $4,000 more somewhere in this budget than we've accounted for now. We must have some idea where that must be. That's a lot of extra money, and I think it should be in those anticipated lines rather than just tell us. Because people don't necessarily know when they look at this budget that unappropriated fund, unassigned fund balance, whatever it's called now, is going to be used for that. It's all just one big budget with revenues and things. So it just seems like, well, we should be thinking about where that really does go, not just holding it out as this amount of money that you might need. Anyway, I think it's worth the discussion of where you think that money might be needed, and it doesn't seem like it's been needed this year. I don't know.
Say that it gets moved to other lines.
Yeah, if it gets, but it would still, wouldn't it show up as an end of the year expense? You moved it, you're tracking it, it's
No,
not
but
in that budget.
Just for
line.
budgeting purposes right now, but we don't know what it's gonna be, but it's gonna end up.
No,
I
when the,
only $30,000.
correct, yep, that's
So
correct.
it's still.
But when you
$54,000.
When you do the budget modification to use contingency for whatever unknown that we don't know what the nature of that overage is gonna be, then that's when that gets moved to the expense account through a budget modification.
But it would show up as an expense on the end of the year off of that line, because you moved it.
So the contingency account really does serve as we're not sure what's gonna happen in the coming year pillow. Compared to other, if you look at the county contingency, which, you can't, that's not apples to apples, but their contingency is, I think, maybe 10 or 15% of their overall budget. Within funds. So I think this is a decent amount of contingency, because we've removed the contingency buffers from individual lines, that's why this is more. We also keep, about 15,000 in the A fund for contingency if an employee adds. An employee who is currently eligible for health insurance, if they add health insurance throughout the year, we have money set aside for that. In both the A and the B fund contingencies. So,
I guess I'd rather see that like in the employee benefits, thing, yes.
Yeah.
Not just as a general contingency 55,000.
So the tricky
This could
part-
be a contingency.
yeah, the
That's
tricky part
my-
with that is that when you look at, when you look at the budgeted versus actual, if year after year, it appears that you budgeted more in the health insurance line than what you've used, like if we had that 15,000 in the A fund health insurance line, then what it looks like in retrospect is that we just always over budgeted that line.
Well, or it looks like you're holding it in case you get a new employee, as opposed to, it could really look like you just over budgeted if you just have $55,000 hanging out in general contingency. Nobody knows even where you think it might go. Whereas if you put it under the area where you are holding, you're holding 15,000 for that. So in that case, it seems to me like it should be in the area that you are holding it, that you think you might need.
So this is a direction that we've been going in for the past 3 or 4 years based on requests by the board. So,
Okay, well, I'm just requesting that we relook at it, so we can talk about it again, or at a public meeting, whatever you want.
Rich, do you have any thoughts about, have you?
Well, yeah, I'm here. I mean, the reason we went in this direction was, what was for what reason? Michelle,
Was to not have contingencies in each, to not have a little bit set aside in here in each of the expense
Right.
lines.
and I think it was also flexibility, because if you put the contingency in each line for a little bit, and you need, there's a lot more adjustments that have to be made rather than having a contingency line. But I do think the 30,000 for the community funding shouldn't be in a contingency line.
It's not, that's just a temporary placeholder to save me time later,
Oh,
so that I
okay,
don't have to go out and guess
Got
what the town board's gonna decide for the community funding. So it's all just
Got it.
there in the draft tentative.
So how much contingency without that is now in there?
$54,375.
That's with the 30 out?
Yeah, which is what I'm saying, I think is a lot. And if you always say that 15,000 of that in your mind, in your planning every year, is in case you get a new employee and you have to put in health insurance, I think that that's where you should put that. I'm not saying there should be $500 contingency in every tiny line. I'm saying if you think that there's something that you really always plan for, it should be there instead. And so that, if you took that 15,000 and put it where
I don't
you want
disagree.
to have it, then you're down to like 35, which is maybe more, even more 40. I still think that's a lot, but I feel like
But I don't think there's
There's
anything wrong with that, Michelle,
people should know where it is.
because you are, that 15 is for a specific purpose in the health insurance line. I don't think there's any big deal putting it in there. Do you?
Okay. So what the board is suggesting right now is that we take the contingency that's earmarked for health insurance and put it in the health insurance line. So
As
that'll
a
happen in the
contingency.
A.
Well,
and
that's
B
two,
fund.
yeah, that's two of us. I mean, Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, that's fine.
It
Um,
could be a contingency line under employee benefits. It doesn't have to be more health insurance than you think you're paying right now. It's contingency in benefits in case you need to pay more benefits. It's still contingency. It's just in a different line.
So you're saying to put it in the existing line,
I'm saying to call it contingency
so to create,
under employee benefits.
so to create a new account line.
Yeah, because saving that in case we need it for any of these things. If we change the number of employees that we have,
Mhm.
so it's an employee benefits contingency. And then it doesn't show up every year that we're overestimating the health insurance, and so we're doing a bad job of that. We're just making sure that we have money if we get a different number of employees or a different expense with regard to employee benefits overall.
So I will look into that. I'm not 100% sure how the chart of accounts that the comptroller's office has. I mean, we can create our own account. I'm just not exactly sure how, because contingency accounts are standard in budgets, and contingency account specific to employee benefits is not standard.
Maybe we've hardly used any of this year, so. I know, okay, where it is.
Yeah,
That would
and
be
I think
$55,000.
Caitlin needs to weigh in on this, and she's not here, so we should, she should.
1990.4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's, essentially, if it's underspent, then it's something.
Right, but it could look to the public like you're raising money for things that you don't spend at all. And
Well, yeah, that's been the discussion we're having, because our fund balance is growing, so we have to figure out which of our fund balance that we want to start. doing.
It's
Okay,
just a philosophical difference. I will raise it at the meeting, so at least it's on the record that I don't think this is the way to do it. We don't have to spend the rest of the day on it. I think. it's-
You are on the
it's a lot
record,
for
it's a public meeting.
not saying where you think it should go. Anyway,
Isn't this on the record? Isn't this a public meeting?
right, but it's gonna go on, right, until we pass the budget, so I'm gonna keep thinking it, is all I'm saying.
All right, well, I'd like to hear what Caitlin thinks too, so,
Agreed.
okay.
You can move. This is a question. Anything within the A fund. Is that correct?
For contingency?
Yeah.
And the DA fund, actually.
Yeah, so, but if it's, is it more difficult if we have, if we have a budget modification? And we start, gosh, let's take some out of this. Benefits. And I need to move it to the parts line or something.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's the same. It'd be the same process.
$200 sometimes. at a
Well, no, I'm just
budget
saying, I can't
modifications.
move like water contingency. in the clerk's
No.
office and that, and
But that's not in the A fund anyway. That contingency doesn't.
Yeah.
Isn't possibly applicable to their level, not put it in a specific place.
Okay.
Anyway, carrying on.
Right.
Well, we were in 1990,
Okay,
41. There's no change in our SPCA contract, so we're at the 3510.4.
we're gonna stay flat.
Yeah.
It's a 3-year contract.
Okay.
And then scooting down to the 5182.4 street lighting. That's not a big change, so we're going down to. We're looking at big items of change.
Is programs for the aging incorporated into the community
Yeah.
funding?
Mhm,
Okay.
Yep, yeah, and actually, most of those yellow ones are part of the community funding. The historical societies. in there. So I guess we're probably down at the employee benefits.
Well, what, can you just say what the big gray square is?
Oh,
The
sure.
Recreation
Yeah.
program?
Yeah, so last year we inaccurately budgeted fees in the PS line where those are all stipends, so technically they're actually, you'll see budget modification tonight about this. Those are moving to the rec CE, the 7020.42. Because they are stipends, And those folks aren't on salary. So, the next big jump that we have on this is on line 82. Which is the New York State retirement. This is tricky every year because they don't release the rates that are really gonna impact us until later in budget season. So right now, this is estimating a 1.5 increase in employer contribution. And this is based on conversations that I've had with Blixie and just knowing that, those employer rates are based on the stock market, yeah, so, we're not sure what the comptroller's office is gonna do this year with that, so, to be safe, we thought a 1.5. We're pretty sure they're gonna raise it, by how much, we don't know. We do have some reserves set aside for if this is an underestimation. But hopefully, we're in good shape with that. Mhm. Yep. So the next jump, looks to be in the health insurance line, which is actually not that big of a jump because of the fact that we're assuming that we're condensing. Well, let me step back. We're assuming that we're not gonna be doing HSA employer contributions, which means that the total cost for health care that was budgeted this year are these two numbers, the 48, these two numbers together, which is that 57,112. That was the total cost that we budgeted, was the health insurance and the HSA contributions. But we're moving towards the platinum plan, which means that it's all gonna fall into one line.
So Michelle, before we do anything with this, we need to have a conversation with the union.
Correct, yep, and that has been happening. So, and that's a
Okay.
good question, discussion for Caitlin.
Yeah,
Yep, she's been doing that, so.
Rich, is that also the time to talk about the retirement health contributions?
Well, so the change in health insurance will just be an add-on MOA. It's the only different change that we're making to the contract. So, although in
Look.
context, when it comes to conversation with the union for this year, for this change, that's the only topic.
that's
Just
not
to
what
make
Michael was talking about, how do can we address the retirement side of the contribution? The
Mhm.
people already retired and going to retire.
Right, yeah,
I mean, yeah, we should have a discussion. I don't know, yeah,
yeah, and that was something that we were gonna take up in the finance committee
right,
level.
okay,
Yes.
we'll
Which
take
we
it
could
up
have a
there.
special meeting if you want to participate in
Well,
that
if it's in
conversation.
another committee or something, that's fine. It's just, so Rich and I talked about it a couple of times.
Yeah, yep.
And this is coming, if this change is coming up, it'd be a good time to. That was parallel. I realize that just an independent law.
Yeah.
It would be a parallel discussion.
Yeah,
It's not as easy, it's just.
alrighty, so there are some bold increases to reserve contributions that I put in here, which are based on our developing capital plan for specifically the town hall. And these reserve contributions are directly tied to fund balance appropriation again. What we're trying to do each year, just a side note about fund balance appropriation. We know that we've accumulated it, but we also have some large unknowns as far as expenses go, with assets, specifically. So, we have the IT upgrade coming. that we know is gonna be a chunk of change, and we do have a handful of work that needs to be done on the town hall. So, this is my suggestion to put money in reserves that we know are going to be expenses coming up in the next couple years. And directly appropriate fund balance into those reserves through the budgeting mechanism. So. Do you want to dive into what that capital plan is looking like at this point? I can bring it up.
Or we could just send it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give Jason.
Sure.
And then I would.
Do you want me to print it?
Is that?
Want me to print it for you? Would that be easier?
And then it. So if you had 145 in for next year, I mean, are you projecting 145 for many years, or is that?
No, no. No, 145 basically, so it's matches what I think we're gonna, that number matches what I think we're gonna need to spend in the next like 3 to 5 years on the town hall. Based on, I also should say that it's been really difficult to get quotes on things. So one of the pieces that we'll circle back to when Caitlin here is just really trying to find a way to ensure that we're taking care of this building. Because nobody here is an expert on it. And chasing down contractors to get quotes and getting understanding is huge. And I have found that every time I walk through the building with somebody, they've got a different suggestion. And so having somebody who has some facilities knowledge to be the point person on that, like a construction manager, I think is going to be key to ensuring that we are keeping this building, one of our main assets, very well maintained.
So we had a facilities committee, a little small committee at the time.
Oh, yeah,
Roxanne and I ran into the same problem. We were going to do the heat pump system.
yeah,
And you know, Tom was bringing people in, and they had as many opinions as people that came in.
it's wild.
And so
Everyone's got a
like,
different solution.
We get a, what we think is just what we work for the task list. And then getting extensive, but it's being have a text.
Yep.
That formally write up.
Yep.
You know, like a scope, so you're not getting all those different opinions.
Right, yep.
Some- One contractor, it's easy, and the other one says, gosh, you better tear it down and start over, right? Then you get everything in between.
And that's the direction that we are heading in. I've had a couple preliminary meetings, but everyone's like, I don't have the time, but here's another name. So
Yeah.
I've been chasing down the rabbit hole on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the idea of having a facilities committee, because knowing that there is a pretty major chunk of work that's gonna have to be done. Including things like we had a design build architect type person come back. And, you know, I walked them through the facilities, and the comment made about the parking lot job was, it was interesting to hear just a small little nugget of somebody with experience counterbalancing something that I was told by a contractor. So that was the moment where I was like, wow, we really need somebody who has experience to know, you know, somebody to have be in our corner and make sure that things are done correctly. So
Wait, I'm sorry.
the other thing that I'll just mention is that I've done, you know, there is a highway staff person who's quite handy and has a lot of experience with basic carpentry. So I've walked through the building with him, and he's told me what he can and cannot do. So we do have a PS line. It's actually a new line in this budget, which is the town hall PS. It's just $1,000, and it's meant for when the highway staff come and work on this building. So there are some smaller things that can be taken care of that I think will make a big difference, including in this closet right here. There's that, the old heater is in there. And so there's direct ventilation outside. You can see the outside from this closet, and that's of course a insulation issue. So that's an example of one of the projects that the highway is going to come and seal that up.
So I was just wondering if it makes any sense to, and I don't know how you would do it. Because if it's not somebody who's already an employee, but to think about, since we have all these capital needs, and we need somebody who's in our court, as you say, and knows something about it. To have an employee of some sort, who is, like, they're like the building and grounds person, or something like on the Ulysses Library, for example, because I'm familiar with that one. I was on the board there, but they, they have a person, it's not a huge job, but that's what he does. He knows the facility. He interfaces along with the facilities committee, and helps, so it would be interfacing with you and the facilities committee, and helps just track everything and be in the discussion, so it's a bridge there, and it would be a person, maybe a community person with some good experience or something like that, and so rather than, a really expensive contractor or something like that, just for that kind of thing, to really be knowledgeable about everything. So I don't know exactly how we put that in or where, because I know there's a lot of constraints to what we're allowed to do with regard to hiring people. But if it could be a consultant or a project assistant for this project for 18 months or something like that, it might just be worth looking at anyway, because then since we know we have to do this project, and
Right.
it would help support, the community, be paying somebody, not all the huge overhead of a big firm to be our interface, and then we'll still get quotes and everything and manage it, but it seems to work really well for the library.
Yeah.
So, and that, again, their goal is to really protect their investment in that
But they
building.
want staff to be volunteer.
No, they're.
Oh, he's an employee, or he or
Yeah,
she is an employee.
Yeah, so I'm suggesting, whatever, say this is a project for 18 months or something, it's a project system, something like that, but we can hire somebody to become familiar with our issues, interface with the highway people about doing that, or whatever's the little carpentry, fix the doors when they don't work, but also help Michelle with these contractors and these estimates for these bigger projects. And I think overall, it could save us some money.
Yeah, so right now, we have in the budget, $3,000 set aside for a construction manager to help with that sort of thing, but I think a more long-term solution is needed, and we've been working with the highway to try to carve out, maybe there is the highway staff person that could sit on this facilities committee to be more of a direct line with, a continuous direct line with all the work that needs to happen here. So I think we have a small amount of money, that $3,000 set aside, specific
Yes,
to
yeah.
all the work that is,
PS,
no, it's not right now.
oh, three, that's capital
Yeah,
for
yeah.
for the $1,000, the PS.
No, so in the 1620.2, there's that line that says $3,000 for a town hall construction manager to help with this slew of work that needs to happen in the next couple years. But then there's also the town hall PS line
Okay.
meant for the highway.
I see,
Yeah.
two different.
Yep.
Okay.
Right, so I guess I'm suggesting that is about, or facilities manager, you
Right.
could call it, and
Yep.
make it a larger number than that. And, take out a little bit more of what you put in the reserves or something, but
Thank you.
just to really get that going.
Yeah, right.
I'm suggesting a further discussion about that
Yeah.
number, that line.
Yeah, I think Caitlin and I have been talking exactly what you're saying, which is that having somebody on staff
Right.
really who can,
And I don't know, we can estimate, how many hours a week that might be, and, in terms of what we were paying salaries, we lowered in, for the town functioning a fund, it's been lowered because of the clerk, deputy clerk,
mhm,
this last, that we had budgeted before, so maybe we look at it as shifting to a new need, but still within the
yeah, right,
staff realm here. Since
And I
we
think-
do have this project that we really want to do,
yeah,
seems it could be justifiably.
Yeah,
Assistant
absolutely.
or something like that,
yeah, I mean, we need
and I
to
think you're
protect.
allowed to have those for like 18 months.
Yeah, right,
Or maybe you can even have more, but like, you keep track, but we can definitely have it for like 18,
mhm,
I think, unless. So anyway, that would be maybe one angle, or perhaps there are other ones, but I just like to see that talked about some more than cables.
Okay.
Think about it.
let me put that in that color then. Oh, wait, I think it already is actually, which is why,
And it's like that person's then around, like if you have small problems and the highway guys can't come over and do it or whatever, but they can do it, and so.
yeah.
I still think, like you said, having some of the highway for things that they actually can do, that's great, but this person interfaces with them, and this person can actually do some of that too, that's, at least that's the model that's been working at the.
Right, so,
So I'm not really thinking of putting it as a PDS line, because then we get hired or something, or I guess it could be if it was a project.
Right.
Still feels great.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, well,
it's a thought,
and the
in
model-
listening to you talk about it, it seems like that would be.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly what we're thinking. And we were thinking more of like a contractor type thing. Did it print?
I didn't check yet, they
Oh.
just popped in my head. We have vouchers this afternoon?
Yes.
Okay, I can just get the meeting or let me do those.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We've been going back and forth, Caitlin and I have been talking about this for a while about needing somebody to work in facilities, like for instance, right now, I am the one changing the air filters for the
Yeah, that's
ELD
what I mean,
system.
this person would do that, like,
Right.
and I just think. Contractors, A, they're really busy, B, they're pretty expensive because you're paying their overhead and everything.
Right,
And so I think that could be done. Not with a contractor and save us money and hire a local,
yeah.
a skilled person.
We've done some preliminary reaching out for that and, I'm not sure if we could find somebody to get on payroll. For how many hours a week, it'd be like. 3, right,
Five.
right. 5, yeah, I don't, during active construction, sure,
No, but even
Yeah.
working on this stuff, it's a bunch of research, all the outreach that you're,
Yeah.
some of what you're doing, they could make those
Yeah.
calls, they. Can talk that language and then
Right.
check back in with you, it's
Yeah.
just an interface.
yeah, like an 18-month position was.
Yeah.
Sort of what we were thinking. was
5
a
hours a week
yeah.
if it was.
Project manager, just to get us caught up on some of this.
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, I think it's.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know, we could guesstimate, say it's 5 hours a week, say we. That for the year,
Yeah. All right,
I don't know how
Um,
much the library's person makes. but it's got- I know. it's not going on. But there are people in this community that think are.
Yeah.
Talented enough to do it. Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know, but I'm just saying
Maybe
that
have
there,
some overlapping projects.
there were people on that facilities committee who were very knowledgeable, like, I'm just saying that in this community, there's a lot of people who do construction and run companies and maybe somebody retired or they're, not doing something else. It's worth a look if we want to.
Yeah.
Just say, would be like would be something else that you'd have, somebody tracking the first line details of it. That's
Yeah,
helpful
right.
too.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
the air filters need changing. Really hot light bulbs need changing, the highway guys are busy too, so
yeah,
anyway,
anyway,
sure.
so I will talk to Caitlin about that and just having as a placeholder, I think we're a little light on that 3,000. I think it would have to be sort of double if we were talking about what you were talking about, but.
Right,
um,
but I'm saying that we could take it either out of, taking 3,000 out of 145,000, looking at here, isn't. And putting 142,000 into the reserve isn't.
Oh, I
a
see,
big
I
deal.
see.
I'm saying it can be moved out of other places.
Yeah.
And it may end up saving us money in the long run with what you want to spend off the capital reserves.
Yeah. Alrighty.
So Caitlin, are these interest revenue numbers updated for the additional interest we're getting from the bank?
For the treasury ladder investments,
Yeah,
no, those are not included in here because of the way that they affect our end of year projection, because all of those will go right into the reserves, opposed to being recognized as revenue that we could just
I'm
use
con-
throughout the fund. But,
well, I'm
those,
confused because So for
Let's
example, on
see.
line A1090, interest on RPT. What's the RPT?
Real property taxes, so that's, when someone pays in February instead of January, like after we've imposed.
Oh.
Penalty or interest, that's what that is.
So we collected 36 last year. 2,000.
One.
How come so much less?
Don't know, it just depends on, when people choose to pay their taxes. That was
Right.
modified, but we've actually, it's about a $700 difference, what we've actually collected this year.
Okay. All right, whatever.
And that's a pretty random number, right? We have no way of really.
I mean, I don't know what the look back is.
I do.
Average.
The average is,
I mean, you can look at it as more people paid their taxes on time this year.
What's
it's
the average?
is 2,300.
Is what?
The average is 2,300.
We should at least do the average.
We did for the 2023 budget.
Oh, okay.
That's.
There it is, got
looking
it.
at line 10,
Okay,
1009.
Yep.
all right. Got it, okay.
And that property tax number is based on our previous conversations at the finance committee, which we have a formula that we estimate based on incoming. Every time we get a sales tax payment, we adjust that number based on
So it's 1120, it's basically sales tax.
that's sales tax. Yep, that's sales tax, and that's across the 4 funds. So at this point, the finance committee has suggested that we use our end of year estimate for our 2023 budget. And this, of course, is more complicated than what you're seeing here because it's across 4 funds and that formula is based on historic numbers and based on an average of how we have historically distributed sales tax across those 4 funds. So there's a lot to that number, but we can dig into it if there's interest.
But you just said that the finance committee recommended using the 2022 end of year projection,
Correct,
but that's more what's in the draft budget. There's more
Correct.
than end of year.
correct, because
So
of that.
Adding more for,
Because of the what's in this version of the budget for each fund is based on historically how we've distributed sales tax. So last year, we distributed less sales tax in the A fund than we have historically,
oh,
is essentially the deal with that.
So the three, in 2021, in this fund, we had 351,816,
Yep,
right?
yep.
And then in 2022, we're gonna have about 191.
Yep.
How come it's so much less?
Because of the proportional way that we distribute sales tax across the 4 funds, it changes every year. So in 2021, we proportionally distributed more sales tax in the A fund than we did in this year's budget.
It was maybe used in another fund.
That number
Less than
changes
used in
drastically.
you definitely get the total sales tax as another complement to
Yeah,
this that we
right.
got.
No, obviously, yeah. Okay. All right.
Which we have if there's interest. We
So,
can,
just a question with regard to sales tax that I've often wondered, and I don't know that I ever looked into, but can we, because say that fire and the ambulance are all of the beat of the town outside the village, can we use sales tax in those?
I don't know. Nope,
Because they're the whole, why not?
because
they're
of,
special districts.
yes, yep. sales tax can't be distributed to special districts.
even if it's the complete whole tax base. I understand that, like the water district, it's not everybody, but the fire and the ambulance are everybody in the B fund. So,
Assessment could answer
yeah,
that question.
I wouldn't mind knowing that if you talk to assessment about something, if you want to ask them that.
Yeah, and I think we have before, and the answer is that the way that they look at the fire and EMS is not the way we look at the B funds. So when they look at the tax base for the fire district and the ambulance district, it actually doesn't mirror the B fund. There's differences that I don't understand what they are, but I've been told that there are differences. So that's,
Wonder what they are.
yeah, and that is like in the assessment gobbledygook of
Or I
goofiness.
can ask if it's okay.
Yeah.
For me to ask versus you. I'm just very curious about that. Because
Right.
I mean, I have asked that question before, and the answer was no. And and separately, I've asked them about the difference between the SM and the SF fund compared to the B fund, and the answer is they don't line up, but there was some really,
but they're the same tax base, so yeah, I just be very curious. I'll try to find that out. If it's okay.
yeah, go ahead. Fine by me.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay. So, that franchise tax number, I'm using the average. That is one that, it's really hard to find out what it's gonna be. It's based on the number of people who have cable. It's also impossible to try to talk to somebody about it. Nobody really knows who the contact is. This is something that was taken up by TCOG years ago about trying to make any amendments for this, but that number is just based on the average of the past 2 years.
And this is specifically for cable?
Correct. Yep.
It's like.
So my guess is this is gonna continue to go down because streaming is so much more happening.
Right.
So so just keep your eye on it.
Do you want me to decrease this number?
I don't know. I mean, who knows? It's been steady here. Yeah, I'd leave it. It's all right.
Okay. Any questions for Carissa about the clerk's fee line? Okay, this next line of this A1289, that's the revenue from the charging station.
Okay,
And it's a little bit less than our end of year projection, just because we haven't been doing it for that long. It's not that big of a deal, but I'd prefer to keep it on the lower end until we really have steady revenue data for that line.
that's fine.
Any questions for Carissa on the dog control fees line? We're gonna skip the park and rec line because Will's coming in separately for a separate meeting for that. And then same thing with these A2350 and A2351. Those will be in different meetings, and actually this one's gonna be in the eighth one. Caitlin sits on the youth commission, so she should be here for those discussions. And then, so this interest in earnings line, this is just based on the savings account. Rich, what I was gonna say is that Blixie does have some projections as far as what our treasury ladder investment is going to
Treasury
produce. Treasury ladder.
Yeah.
So that will be coming via the finance committee agenda. But it's
But then
not,
you'll put it, what?
it's not included in here because of the way we have to recognize that revenue. It goes right to the reserve accounts. And the reserve balances that are listed in the 2023 notes column in the budget document reflect Blixie's estimates for interest additions.
Say that again. So we're not gonna see it in this line?
Let me scroll up here.
I mean, it should be somewhere.
Yeah, well, it's not, so. It is included in these totals here. Over here,
But it going into the reserves.
correct, yep. So those, anticipated reserve
And why
totals
do we want it to
include
go into the reserves?
for the treasury ladder
Where's that?
investments.
I don't see it. What line?
Are you asking why the treasury ladder investments are going into the reserves?
I am asking that, but I don't see where what line is it in here?
It's, the interest is included in these anticipated reserve total estimates in the 2023 notes.
I see.
So it's buried in the total. But if you want that, we can also discuss that at the finance committee about, you know, how Blixie did those calculations.
I mean, philosophically, why do they go into reserves? Shouldn't they just go to reduce expenses?
Because it's reserves that we invested.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So once we get to a point where if we feel like we want to invest fund balance into that treasury ladder, that is where we can start recognizing the revenue. But for now, the revenue line, the interest revenue line is only represents what we're getting from the savings account.
Okay. Right. All right. Okay.
Any questions for Chris about the dog licensing line? The fines and fortified bail, that's actually, we're gonna be discussing that, in a separate meeting, because we have a court meeting with the court. I think it's our last budget meeting is with the court, so we can review that then.
It's interesting, so, so, $2,000 left. Basically, or $20,000 left. Oh, they guys people, they're still, okay. Yeah. I was looking at comparison in 20.
Alrighty. AIM-related payments. Association of Towns has interpreted the state budget that this is gonna be flat for next year. So that's what's in that. line. Oh boy. It is
Oh, where did
like
it
the
come
most, the state.
Okay.
It is like one of the most confusing
Just
state
wouldn't-
aid
yeah.
things.
Isn't that repayments of some percentage of our
Sales tax.
Not anymore,
Internet
not
tax.
anymore, not anymore.
Right,
Yeah.
change it all.
Yeah.
I do know what we want to do is become a city, because you get a lot. You're a city.
All right, how do we do that?
But they haven't had it once since the 1940s, so.
Oh. I was in a our fiscal health monitoring webinar on Friday. And basically, for all the municipalities, it was nice to get the statewide view of how municipalities are doing fiscally. And essentially, what they were saying was that it's villages and cities that had a really hard time through the pandemic because of the sales tax stuff. So, there wasn't anybody who's in fiscal stress right now is a city or a village. Counties and towns are not in fiscal stress. Because of that exact line of revenue situation, yeah.
I've also watched, I've done plenty of studying this previously on how cities manage their budget. One of the bigger cities in New York and have some, a lot of liabilities.
Yeah,
A lot of treasures.
Probably massive personnel costs
Okay.
too, just with things like. police, Everything like that relative to what we have to personnel.
Oh, absolutely.
And the pensions and everything related to that must be a huge unpredictable chunk, you know?
Well, and also they don't have the benefit we have when we collect property taxes, we get first cuts.
Right.
The county takes theirs, so we're home first. And then both states will have that. So,
really
I don't think so.
interesting.
Well, but the county can change the way they decide to apportion it to the towns, right?
I would think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Actually, they have.
No, that would be an uproar, I imagine, but. I mean, some towns don't take tax, they just leave it at the county, and
Right.
it's the county tax, for the person, some different ways to. honestly,
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going. Let's keep going here. Come on.
Well,
Mortgage.
we're set to end early here, Rich, so,
Well, good. Let's end earlier. All right.
all right,
Did you talk
so,
about mortgage
this-
tax?
mortgage tax, I want to talk about mortgage tax, okay. So this one is, one of those lines that we have historically under budgeted because we do not have a way of really estimating it. So the way that I put it in for this budget represents about a 20% increase from last year's budget, but reflects a 3-year average.
All right,
Um,
so the thing, so normally I'm for raising the mortgage tax, but there are gonna be many less mortgages this year because of the interest rate, is so high now. So I think we're gonna get much less mortgage tax revenue this year.
Okay, what do you want to see that number at, Rich?
Well, I would, well, maybe, so we're anticipating 136. We could be
For
down
this year, yep,
20, 30, I would say 100,000
for this year,
for next year, yeah.
for
the-
next year. And what do you think about that 136?
For the end of the year projection.
Yeah, that's
probably
based on, that's based on, average of our second payment from the last 3 years. So we already have that 78,557 year to date, and we have one more payment left in November, and I just added the average.
Yeah,
We only need to get $57,442 in our next payment. Is that 157?
It says we've gotten 78,557 so far.
but we
Oh, I
don't know. That was as of 8/31, right? We don't know.
Yeah, we gotta get 57.
I would lower that to 125. Just to be safe,
It's 5 or 10 year mortgage.
because for all the data is mortgages are falling off a cliff.
Yeah. There is an average. So here is, let's see.
Is the first payment we received from mortgages for November through May?
I don't think it's that simple.
Because it'd be really helpful to know when the range is like more collected, because then we get an estimate based on, some of the when the interest rate started to creep up and how much time, the second payment collects in advance of that date. Because I'm sure there are people rushing to lock in rates.
Right.
They're not now, Caitlin, rates are,
No, I'm saying before the rates went up, people were rushing to lock in.
yeah, so we don't really know.
Look at pre-COVID too, I mean, the COVID, since COVID hit, the purchasing of mortgage taxes gone up a lot.
So the average
So
for the,
pre-COVID, it was roughly $195,000.
Well, look, the second payments in those years were 54.
Right.
57. So maybe we're
Right.
off some, but I don't think the year average would be way off.
But looking at like 2015 to 28, even 2019, before COVID hit, that the total mortgage tax we got is roughly $100,000 on average. So,
Right.
98.
right, so I don't, and we're trying to wonder what's gonna happen next year, now that interest rates are higher. And people are a bit on the COVID, so. I guess the question is whether 127 is too high, is that what you're raising?
That's what I'm saying. 127 is too high.
Definitely did see the second payment always looked like, I was that based on looking at the second payment reflects.
Look, the last 4 or 5 years, you have interest rates at 3%. So people were buying tons of houses. Now 30 years at 6%. So all the data coming in is housing is really falling off a cliff here.
So. I've decreased next year to 100,000. And right now, I think, just for clarity's sake, I'm curious, what we want to put in, just to isolate, I'm just isolating this question. What do we think we're gonna get from mortgage tax for the second payment?
Well, that 78,557, was that through June for a half a year?
Yeah, so we get it in 2 payments.
Right.
Yep, so that's, we've got that already.
So I think if if you went to 128, that'd be all right.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's okay, it's just figuring and looking back at the historical, that seems completely.
Right, but what I'm saying is the historical is not gonna give us a lot of comfort here.
But that's for this year, right? And then next year is for,
You're never gonna hear me argue against the conservative estimate, so.
right?
Right.
But what if we did 110 instead of 127 for the next year's budget? When it was roughly 100 pre-pandemic.
But I don't, the question is the future. And all I'm saying is if you look at the housing data, they're falling off a cliff. You could do, I just think you want to be safe here.
Right, so I was suggesting, well, Michelle wrote in 100, I was saying 110, maybe for the 2020.
Well,
Instead
yeah,
of
well-
127.
Yeah, it's still, whatever.
Split the difference, 105.
So, yeah,
Sure.
and that would go to the running average pre-COVID and everything.
Yeah, but no-
Right, but and then if we end up with more, well, we do, but we're making a very reasonable, we go towards fixing the town hall and being the fund balance, but we have really good justification for why we're choosing that number, which I think is all we can do as our duty to the public.
Our prognostication is based.
Right.
All right, well, all these numbers are gonna change when we change revenue like that. Right now, this budget is $22,000 out of balance, so that's gonna have to come from somewhere. Or we need to make some cuts to what's in the draft tentative. So, so more work to be done. But, what do we wanna do? We have another 40 minutes before noon, if we're interested in continuing. Or we can pick this back up when we circle back to the A fund, next week. I believe. Yeah, in a week from today.
Well, I think in some ways, it would generally make sense on a larger thing to start with revenue, actually. Because then we're going to why, if we look at revenue, I'm like, if we adjust the revenue, it would be nice to adjust the revenue first, and then be like.
And to be honest, the A fund is really the one that, the rest of the revenue and other funds really
Doesn't
is,
change that much.
yeah.
It's just what you do with the sales tax.
And it's the revenue in the A fund, the unpredictability of the revenue in the A fund, I blame solely for our fund balance accumulation.
How much is the fund balance?
It's high.
Well, are you-
It's a lot.
Company offset.
You'll give us those numbers at some point?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay, because I think that matters too, especially, I mean, it matters to me, I think in the revenue discussion too, because if we make a concerted decision, as I've heard the board talk about before, to, spend down some of it, but I still think we should be conservative and holding on to some of it. I feel that strongly. That it should not be totally stepped down, but we maybe can feel a level that we're comfortable.
Yeah.
Spending that, so knowing that would help with the revenue, as Caitlin's suggesting, and then that helps with adjusting the
Yeah.
income, I think.
So right now, and this is all based on our end of year. Our end of year projections. And, in the future, so this is the first time that we've done this line by line when we haven't had. You know, it's been a pre-tentative budget release, so still just learning about the information, you know, when it comes to producing that, chart for fund balance, what's available for fund balance, because everything changes between now and when we release the draft
Right.
tentative, it's like a ton of time for me to pour in to, you know,
Right.
to plug those numbers in, but, so this
Right.
is the super preliminary,
Right,
this number right here, this 859,344. And then if we set aside 25% of fund balance, this is what we have available for appropriation.
which is like, that's kind of a safe level of controller's office.
Well-
Or people say, they won't say,
They will
I
never
know,
tell
they
you.
will not give you a number.
And actually,
It's way more than they let school districts do, though.
schools are like 1%.
I
which is
know.
insane
It is
to me.
insane.
I don't understand.
That's
that
a
at
side
all.
conversation, but I agree.
Yeah.
It is-
But, I do think, so we do
42
probably.
is not really enough, though, in this day and
No.
age, that's for sure.
So in this version of the budget that is now changed, we were looking at about 500,000 available for appropriation, and I'm suggesting this 289 number, which is directly connected at this point to one-time expenses, including reserve additions, which is where we want to get to as far as responsible fund balance appropriation goes, is that we don't want it to go towards operational annual costs. So,
No, so that, but some of that fund balance is year one's payment that we got of the ARPA funds.
that's
No.
not included in that. No.
So we didn't get any ARPA funds yet.
No, we have it all. We have it
Okay.
all. It's just not represented in fund balance.
It's not in the fund balance at all.
Mm-mm.
No, where is it?
You actually aren't supposed to recognize it as revenue until you spend it,
Oh,
according
okay,
to.
so it's in some other strange line.
It's not represented in our budget except for as income to offset those expenses, the capital expenses.
Right,
Um,
but it is not, so that's fund balance beyond the ARPA money we have to
Correct.
spend. Well,
Yeah.
that's.
Yeah.
I mean, that's good, but, and we should make a plan, but, yeah.
So, yeah, that's that. But eventually there will be, when you get the tentative budget, there will be that fund balance chart that was available last year. That has all these numbers in it. Do you want a copy of the capital plan? A hard copy?
Yeah.
Of it,
Or, no, I mean, I know what time comes.
do we still have, is Rich still with us? Yes, okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Alrighty,
I'm here, yeah.
so are we okay for now on this, or? This
Yeah.
leaves us in a good spot to circle back to the rest of the A fund. I know what we need to do, so,
I didn't know if we wanted to raise the couple of things. With Caitlin that we talked about, that we said. Wait till Caitlin comes back.
sure.
One was that discussion about like potentially thinking about a sort of a town hall facilities type person for a special project of, and increasing that money a little bit over that, obviously something else to be taken out. And the other was the contingency distribution. I don't know if
So.
you want to do that now, but we can,
Okay.
if that's.
So let's start with the facilities one, which is that we have this placeholder within 1620.2 for the town hall construction manager. Which you know, I was telling them, Caitlin, that you and I have been in discussion about having a facilities person, you know, actually having somebody on staff.
Yeah, that's what I agree with.
Well, right, so I was just suggesting that maybe maybe it might make sense to think about it. And in turn, like I was just using the model of the library, the Ulysses Library, and they have like a facilities person, manager person, and he works with the board and with the, the director and everybody, and there's a facilities committee on the board, but it's just to be able to do things and also to know about the building,
Right.
all of the things and to do things that need to be done and also so it needs to be someone who's good, familiar with construction, but then can help the community, in between with Michelle saying, I don't know that much about these things. When you talk to people to get estimates, or you look at like the insulation and you work with the highway department. And so I was just wondering if, you had 3K in there, but if we looked at it, like if we could find someone, we could, look in the community as the library did, and there are a lot of people in this community. And maybe would take on a part-time thing. And, if the average that they work was say 5 hours a week or something like that, they're either doing research or they're here fixing things, and it might be on and off. We could make an estimate of how much that would be for a whole year, at 5 hours a week at however many dollars an hour. And then, put that in as a PS, and perhaps we could use like a project assistant line that the county allows for 12 to 18 months anyway, if we look at it as this is what we're doing. And if we really, if it works in our budget and we needed it more permanently, then we can look at it, but it would really help us jumpstart these town hall capital things, and it doesn't seem like it would be, you have 3K here, maybe it would, I don't know the word triple that, but we could.
So what you just said is $8,000, Roxanne.
Pardon me?
5 hours a week, 30, it's $8,000 a year, what you
Yeah.
just proposed.
At what hourly rate, like,
30 an hour,
okay, so 8,000.
5 hours a week.
So, so it'd be another 5,000. So it'd be another, 5,000, but I think there's certainly places to take it out of that. Well, maybe you can take it out of contingency where there's a lot, 55,000 still, or a little bit out of the money that we're putting into the reserves, or funding it with ARPA, because we're really trying to get this going. I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot of money to me to put in and move a little bit out of somewhere else to really get that going and take some of the load off you, and might even save money in that
I think it will save money.
ARPA line overall. I mean, because if you're hiring a contractor, they're a lot more expensive. They have a lot of overhead and they're harder to get because they're really busy. And so this might work, and it might employ a community person be engaged. And so it seems like a potential win-win to look into the way I'd like to think about it. If you guys think.
No, I think it'll actually save the town money overall, because delaying the discovery of issues that have been allowed to languish simply because we don't have somebody only makes us cost more expensive when we're finding running. And so, right, I think we just don't have anybody currently on staff with us capacity and knowledge to
Right.
expand.
To the time. And they can, can still have the highway do some of the work, but this person helps like track all that, or like Michelle says, when you have to change the filters so that you make sure our heating system is working well, and that saves us money on electric bills, and then they're tracking that stuff and looking at the insulation and talking to the parking lot people for you and getting quotes on the painting and sorting through the different numbers that you're getting, and that's like a big help. It's saving us money not to pay you for that, so you can do your other things
Well,
you
and
do for us that no one else can.
somebody who's integrated into that industry
Community,
would be very helpful. I can't find anybody to make backdoor ADA compliant. for
Exactly,
instance.
but so.
And so
perhaps
it's like
we-
we need a dog with dog with a bone.
So
We need
maybe-
somebody
Well,
who's like,
the
that's their main
problem is,
focus.
Maybe we can advertise for it. I propose putting it in the budget at maybe $8,500 or something like that.
So you
The
said,
only-
Yes.
the problem with this is you can't find a contractor to do anything. So to try to find somebody is gonna be difficult, but not, hopefully not impossible.
I have somebody I have in mind.
Well, I mean, the library found somebody, I mean,
The school had a part-time facilities manager.
right, but this is more part-time, so people might, want to do it as, somebody might be somewhat retired from their construction business. There's a lot of people
Yeah.
like that.
Right.
in this community, there are a lot of construction
Oh,
people,
huge numbers.
knowledgeable, and so, yeah, they've got a lot of work to do,
But they also don't, aren't necessarily taking up big projects, it's more than like low key kind of.
Yeah,
engage that they're
right.
actually interested in.
yeah, I think I said like 8,000.
I did this, based on $38 an hour at 5 hours at 52 weeks.
Oh, okay, I thought Rich said it was 8,000.
All right. And 30 may be too little, yeah. 30 may
Well-
be too little,
30 might be too little.
Yeah, so maybe put it up to 8,000 or 8,000.
probably 40.
Yeah, okay, so
Yeah,
40 would increase it a lot.
well, I think you gotta be realistic about getting people.
And right now, this is offset by ARPA funds, which I do find appropriate because it's one time.
Right.
well, so
One-time
how about like
capital.
8,500, that's kind of in between, be like $35. If you think 10,000 is too.
No, I don't. I mean,
Okay.
if we're being reasonable,
All right,
having it being offset by ARPA funds
yeah,
gives us a lot more flexibility because those are one-time expenses, so.
and
It
they
makes
don't
sense.
show up in this budget.
No, they do. They do.
But it would be there, but there'd be a revenue line that does not show up right now.
Yes, it's in there. Yep.
What's the revenue line that's,
It is.
oh, federal aid, other ARPA?
Yep.
Right, and I'm not even saying we should necessarily increase that, we could look at decreasing something else so that we don't use even more of the ARPA.
Yep.
In fact, I think we should. But anyway, I think we might not find someone, but I think we could look and. I mean, just for all of you, you saw like Chris would just call somebody, you know?
Yeah.
Right. And they might not be able to come in 5 minutes, but they can come, in, half a day or something.
Yeah.
Right, and really help you with research all the rest.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's an idea.
Okay. What's next?
This contingency line to talk about.
Right, I was just raising a different. Well, a slightly different philosophy on the way that it's done right now, which. If you take, I know that there's 30,000 in there, it isn't gonna be in there, it's gonna be in other places once we get the community funding requests. So that still leaves that number at 54, 375. In general contingency. And of which Michelle said 15,000 is always earmarked in case. We need, we get another employee or we have to change health benefits or anything, and so and again, it's just a philosophical difference, but. To me, that's a large number just for contingency, like if something happens and if we think that there are expenses at that level that we might have. Block expenses, I feel like we're, in terms of the public following the budget and transparency, that they should be under those. Categories, and I'm not arguing that like every $1,000 that you think should be somewhere else, there should be a contingency line, so there's a million contingency lines, but for something as big as like 15,000. If it's possible to do, I think that should be under employee benefits instead of just very general, because then if you see year to year, okay, people can understand that if you get another employee, that's what that's for there. And so we're not just, adding taxes or expenses. People don't tend to follow the complexity of the reserve funds and everything, that we have a good reason for that 15,000, and that lowers that down to 40 or less. And which I still think is a bit high for just straight contingency. If you think it goes somewhere else, then it goes somewhere else, but I'd like to see some of that moved out and put into at least that one place that I've heard in this discussion. Is a place that we always hold that.
Yeah, I'm fine with the example. You have a problem with that?
I don't know, so I think the most elegant. OSC accepted rendition of this idea would be to create a 1990.41. Employee benefits contingency account.
Okay. Sure. That would be okay with me. Because then it just looks like, I mean, it's more clear to the public what we think.
Yeah, we got it. Okay, good. And what else about that? Caitlin, you're good with it, right?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay,
And I mean, we haven't spent that much contingency yet. It's good to have some, but again, that might be a place that we can take a little bit of money out to.
Yeah, what
do
are
the other things we're talking about here, like the facilities manager or something like that.
based
So-
on these questions, I'm gonna ask Lixie to look into how much we've used historically out of that contingency, and then I'm gonna look into other similar towns to see what the percentage of their contingency is to the rest of the fund.
Right, I only remember it from many years ago, but it was like 10,000 or so, like, so unless we've had some giant thing that's happened in a year, and it would be good to know what that was actually, and where it might have come from, you know, so.
I think that the ticking up of that contingency really came from the board's request to remove the contingency buffers from all of those individual
Well,
lines.
I mean, way back when I remember, we didn't have contingency buffers in every little line, so
Right.
that got changed too, but
Right,
if we actually used them, I think that would be a really useful thing to see.
yeah,
So, because
But-
maybe we can lower that a little and use it for this facilities manager and not really change anything.
That goes on, will change our internet part of the south. We need to continue to do the right. We've made progress like.
right, right.
So it's gonna, so, right, so.
Well, you can just look at the main line for now, you know, and.
Yeah, I'm interested in seeing how other towns, maybe not our size, but other towns in Tompkins County, what their contingency lines in the A fund look like.
Right.
Yeah.
Cause, yeah, cause it was, I mean, years ago, it wasn't super padded, and like when I inherited it from Doug and then I did it, it was. Not padded in a ton of other lines, and it was only about 10. I mean, we had less expense, you know, different things were happening,
Right.
then, but it was never 40 or 50,000.
Yeah.
That's a lot. I mean, if we thought we needed more for attorney, then we put it in the attorney or something like that, and then if you didn't spend it, well. You thought you did, but you tried to estimate where it needed to be rather than just. A large amount that people noticed, you know, reason.
Yeah, yeah, I'll be interested in seeing what other
Yeah,
municipalities are doing.
I'd like to see that. Do it.
Yep. Yeah, I can bring that to the next A fund meeting.
Great. Thanks.
Well, I personally think it's been very, I wasn't here for all of it, but Roberta was here, I found it very useful.
Yes, and I will second what you said in the beginning, Michelle. This is a much better way to do it.
I mean, procedurally, what you're supposed to do when you make changes to the tentative budget
I know.
is like
No, I know.
backflips. So I'm like,
Right.
let's do this before.
No,
the
it's
backflip. Okay, well, should we
And
adjourn?
it crunches getting the preliminary on time.
Right,
And
exactly.
Preliminary, you don't want people to just randomly vote yeah for the preliminary, because then if the final fails, you are at
Right,
the various loss.
yeah, but
I think this is great. Thank you for all the work.
yeah,
Well, these make actual budget season for like. the
Right.
October, during the-
Well, yeah, not making it a third of the year is a good idea.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
because there's like a lot of other stuff the board has to do.
One or two things.
Yeah,
So I moved to adjourn in 2 seconds.
yes, I will second.
Awesome. We are adjourned.
Great, thank you.